Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grim Flayer. Hope you're doing very well today, and it has been far too long since I have brought you some mono red prowess content in Modern, and that is what we are here today to rectify. So let's talk a little bit about the list. As I say, it has been a while. The last time you saw me play, I was on 4 Bedlam Reveler and 4 Mishra's Bauble, and to be clear, I still think that is perfectly viable. It was my favorite way to play the last time I played, but times have changed, right? Times have changed a little bit, and I was consulting, recent 5-0 lists, recent high-placing lists and challenges or preliminaries, and I'm a little bit out of touch with the archetype, so I actually went in with the notion for once to not build my own list or not tweak somebody else's, but just to say, okay, what are people doing? I'm going to pick my favorite list. I'm going to look at them. I'm going to think about it. I'm not just going to pick one at random, but I am going to go with somebody else's list for my return to League Play with Prowess. But I couldn't do it, guys. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Every list I just had a bit of a minor disagreement with, a bit of a qualm, and eventually that just led me to build my own list, which is what you're looking at here. But I did take a lot of cues from the lists that have been doing well lately. Now, the most important of these cues is that we are back on Kiln Fiend. I did see one list recently playing 4 Rev with Bauble, another one playing Runaway Steamkin, but by and large, the list succeeding right now play 2 or more often 3 copies of Kiln Fiend, and I agree that makes sense to me right now. The meta is a little bit less grindy than it was when I was packing the full 4 Bedlam Reveler, right? And the type of grind that is there is more skewed toward blue. Those are 2 factors that make me not quite as high on the 4th Bedlam Reveler as I once was. And also, M21 recently has dropped, right? And when new cards enter the meta, and when the meta is in a little bit of flux, when you're in doubt, it makes sense to err on the side of racing and on the side of proactivity, and that is what Kiln Fiend does. So with those things in mind, it is 3 Kiln Fiend in this list, and when we play Kiln Fiend, we do not like to play Mishra's Bauble as a rule, because, of course, Bauble does not proc Fiend, right? Bauble does not trigger Fiends +3/+0. Therefore, to make up for the lack of Baubles, we're just bringing more heat. And I've got a kind of esoteric selection of shocks here, 2 Forked Bolt and 2 Wild Slash. If you want an in-depth take on why I play the shocks that I play and what I think about the shocks in general, how they fit in various builds, what creatures they synergize with, so on and so forth. I have an entire video on which shock is best in Mono Red Prowess. You can find that in the playlist that you're watching this video in right now. But here I'm on 2 copies of Forked Bolt and 2 copies of Wild Slash. And the sideboard is where things get a little bit different from what I'm used to. So the major way in which they are different is 3 copies of Soul Guide Lantern. And Soul Guide Lantern is kind of the new trend, kind of the new norm for Graveyard Hate. You will occasionally see people playing Leylines, maybe you'll occasionally see people playing Tormod's Crypt, but Soul Guide Lantern, we need one-sided Graveyard Hate, of course, and Lantern seems pretty good in a world dominated by Uro, right? Cast it, ETB, exile their Uro, or something else of relevance, and then from there, you can make it into a one-sided board wipe, or you can cash it in for value. It would be nice to have both, but in the color red, unless we want a symmetrical effect like Relica Progenitus, we don't have access to that. So Soul Guide Lantern, probably the best on offer for our archetype. And the removal suite in our sideboard is kind of interesting. So I began designing the list saying, I don't really want to leave home without 1 Dismember. I think this card's really important for our archetype. I often play 2, but I'm going to consider 1 a soft minimum until otherwise. And I also really like Bonecrusher Giant, especially in Kiln Fiend builds, because Kiln Fiend can be a little bit weak to the type of attrition that the 4 Bedlam Reveler build is really good at. That is to say, discard and removal, non-blue fair decks, basically. Kiln Fiend can struggle there, so Bonecrusher Giant, definitely fine to bring in against the blue-based, fair decks, blue-based attrition and control, but also especially good against the non-blue attrition decks, and fine supplementary removal, especially when goblins are a major deck to beat, and, every goblin that is going to see regular play is going to die to Stomp. So even though Stomp is less efficient in terms of the damage dealt and the mana spent to do that damage than many of our other options, it is still really good supplementary removal to have a critical mass of that when we're trying to control the board. And of course, it is an inherent 2-for-1. So I like Bonecrusher Giant, especially in a Kiln Fiend build. More broadly, the card has impressed me when I've played it in this deck. So, with 1 Dismember and 2 Bonecrusher as cards that I was really interested in having as a minimum, then I also started out saying I want 3 copies of Abrade, but looking at it, I was like, are we starting to get to too much removal? Especially because, again, remember, we have a full 4 shock effects in the main deck without baubles, and so I reluctantly, because I think this card is an all-star in the archetype, did shave an Abrade down to 2, but the major reason I was reluctant to do that is not for a lack of removal, as I say, we have plenty, but for a lack of shatter effects as a critical mass of those. And for that, I kind of got my gears turning, and I opted for a pretty interesting call that most people don't usually make, which is to play the card Pillage. Now, Pillage, of course, usually this is Blood Moon in a slot like this, but it occurs to me that the big mana decks are very happy to side in their nature's claims against us just because they can't afford to let a Blood Moon stand, and if they can hit anything at all with it, it's going to be a really nice incidental life gain as well. So it's kind of an answer card and a hate card rolled into one. So yes, Blood Moon has a higher ceiling than Pillage, but I think our big mana matchup on this archetype is actually really good inherently. Not to say we don't want Not to say we want to completely do away with any sideboard hate for it. I think you want a balanced sideboard in Prowess because you don't want to overboard in any matchup, right? So even though the big mana matchups are mostly fine, it still makes sense to play, 2-3 hate cards for them in most metas. And Pillage, again, lower ceiling for sure than Blood Moon in big mana matchups, but a higher floor. And if our matchup is already inherently fine, well, there's nothing wrong with racing and blowing up a land along the way, and that should set them back pretty far while we are, again, putting the pedal to the metal and racing. And the nice thing about Pillage, of course, it gives us a critical mass of shatter effects against Chalice of the Void decks, against heavy artifact decks, and especially against Eldrazi Tron, where either the Stone Rain mode or the Shatter mode is going to be very important. Pillage will never be bad when you draw it in that matchup under almost any circumstance, and the modal mode, the modal status of Pillage, I should say, is definitely a very nice one. And finally, rounding out the sideboard, Boil. Boil's a card I've been loving in Jund, actually much like Pillage, and I've not played it before in Prowess because it's a lot harder to curve out to 4 lands in Prowess than it is in Jund, but that's not to say we can't do it. We certainly can a lot of the time. It's just not as obvious of an inclusion, but the blue decks are everywhere, the snow-covered island decks are everywhere, and many people are playing Boil in recently successful Prowess lists, and I opted to do the same. And finally, a full playset of Dragon's Claw. I've been running into a lot of burn and Prowess myself when I'm playing BGX, so why not tech for it here? I think now is a great time to do so. So there we go, my friends. That's my rundown. That's kind of what I opted for as I returned to Prowess from a couple months, I think, of not playing it in any kind of a competitive sense, or really even a casual sense, frankly. You guys like this content, by the way? If you like this content, please do hit the subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and consider joining us on Patreon. I appreciate each and every person doing that. All the relevant info is in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and without further ado, let's get into some Prowess gameplay. We're on the draw here, round 1, game 1, my friends, and this is a replay league, and I am showing you the matches a little bit out of order. Sometimes I will do that because it is more appealing, I think, or the structure, flow of the league makes a little bit more sense that way. And in this case, it just so happens that what you're about to see, I think, is the coolest match of the 5 that I played. So we are pretty obviously against a Gruul deck where they go turn 1 Arbor Elf on the play, and fortunately we are able to Lava Dart the Elf away. Now, always nice to get turn 1 Swifty down, right? But I believe greatly in controlling the board when the board is there to be controlled. Especially against a deck like this where they can have some really impactful 3-mana plays on turn 2 if you let the Dork live. So we slow down their mana, but then they spend turn 2 just doubling down on their ramp plan. They make another land drop, they play 2 Utopia Sprawls, and then it is back to us. So I'm opting for the Kiln Fiend here, and actually, you know, there's a non-zero argument for getting the Swifty down, getting Crash through. This guarantees that our whatever creature we play connects for damage before they get removal online, and Kiln Fiend does not guarantee that at all. And Crash through just lets us see one more card, potentially getting an earlier Reveler down, or crafting a more impactful turn 3. So even though Kiln Fiend, the earlier the better, there's actually, with this hand, there was some incentive to do the opposite line. However, I think when it's in doubt, you should really, most of the time, opt for the Kiln Fiend, right? Because unlike Swifty into Crash Through, Fiend grants extremely diminishing returns the longer you put it off. Sadly for us, opponents got that turn 3 Glorybringer on the play. Pretty brutal. The Dragon will exert, the Kiln Fiend will go down, and we rip a Swifty off the top. Seems fine. Yep, seems fine. It's definitely a fine way to try to go wide against what essentially amounts to repeated removal, right? And again, getting some damage off of our creatures before more removal, or in this case, blockers, hits the field. Opponent will pitch a Klothys, God of Destiny. I do find that interesting. Obviously, this was in hand for them to pitch it, and I guess they were just worried about us being able to outright kill them this turn, because if they had the ability to stabilize, then maybe Klothys is something that they'd be very interested in, but they went for the safer line of Spyro. You understand it. And unfortunately, we've ripped a mountain off the top, so all we've got here is a Lava Spike followed by an attack. Now, if we want to use this flashback to Lava Dart, we could either do it before blocks, or we could do it after blocks, depending on what we expected them to do. And that would be all well and good in terms of helping our creatures survive and helping get more damage across potentially. However, we have to cast Bedlam Reveler next turn, and if we flashback Lava Dart, we're actually kind of far away from it. We'll be 2 mana or 2 spells in the bin shy of it. So I say we're just going to attack. We're going to try to force as much through as we can. And however they're going to block, they're going to block. We're all in on the Bedlam Reveler, baby. Will Reveler help us? I don't know. The Spyro has found them a Bloodbraid Elf, a little bit scary. Fortunately, only cascading into an Arbor Elf, but we've got bigger problems. Glorybringer is going to take down our other creature, and we rip another land off the top. And I'm going to play it. Fiery Islet. The 1 point of damage we take here is not free. There's actually a little bit of consideration to play Mountain, but I opted for getting the land down anyway, the Canopy land, and we hit a nice treasure trove of payoffs off of this Bedlam Reveler draw 3. Lightning Bolt, Soul-Scar Mage, Lava Dart seems really, really good, and the opponent, even though they've done a lot of very powerful things, the opponent is still at 7. And they've got Pillage, sure, Pillage takes care of our can land, no worries. And then they're just going to dump out the rest of their hand, which is an Arbor Elf. Not very exciting for the opponent, and we rip another Bedlam Reveler off the top. So my first instinct was to say, okay, what spells do we want to cast? How can we empty our hand most effectively in order to follow up with a second Rev and just totally bury the opponent in value? But then I looked a little bit more closely and said, oh hey, you know what? I think we have lethal, so it's going to be Bolt the big guy, and then triple Lava Dart, flashing back 2 of them to take care of 3 1/1s and to achieve exactly 7 power on our Bedlam Reveler for a very feel-good win in round 1. So for game 2, I have committed fully to the control the board plan, and I think that's wise. I think that is merited here. Now, they do have some things that are resilient to removal or that have ETBs, so it's not like one of those matchups where you can kill everything that moves, and as long as you are drawing a critical mass of removal spells, you're like 80-20. Maybe that's the case for like elves and infect and stuff like that. That's not the case here. Nevertheless, I do believe it to be correct to bring in the removal. So Abrade ×2, Bonecrusher ×2, Dismember ×1 come in. And the other thing about Abrade is sometimes these decks play random stuff like Trinisphere I've seen before. Maybe other artifacts that are unexpected. Not a bad idea, I suppose, to have an out to that. And Pillage, I did not not bring in, even though the card Pillage in kind of a vacuum, like a general sense, is definitely valid against the Utopia Sprawl deck. Didn't opt for it here. Don't think it's necessarily the best idea, especially on the draw for our particular archetype. Kiln Fiend I cut entirely on the draw. We're bringing in the Bonecrusher so we have more resilient threats. They've got a lot of ways to remove Kiln Fiend, especially post-board. And I just cut a couple copies of Lava Spike, again, committing to the grind as well as the ability to control the opponent's board state. And our opening hand is pretty fine on the draw. One lander doesn't really have an early threat, but it controls the board very well, and it can draw 2 off of Light Up the Stage. Forked Bolt, kind of a bad draw, just because it's a little bit more of the same. But the opponent did not have a turn 1 play. Very, very interesting. We are happy to see that. And I believe they also mulliganed. I forgot to take note of that. I think they mulliganed all the way down to 5. So having done so, they're just keeping anything functional, all right? No surprise to not see that. And the opponent's forced to run out of Skoos well ahead of schedule. They would prefer, of course, to deploy it after the resources have all been traded off and the dust settles. And we draw a second land. So our position has gone from better to... from good to better to even better, right? So what do we do here? Well, I actually, strangely enough, kind of like the Manamorphose here. Why? Well, even though, of course, ideally we'd want to see that with a bunch of creatures down. Right now, we don't have any Prowess creatures. We have no Kiln Fiend. So cashing in Manamorphose actually plays for a higher upside in a couple different ways. Number one, we could find Swifty, and then we get to go Swifty, Wild Slash, or Forked Bolt the Ooze, go to town, or even Soul-Scar Mage just without haste. That's still a very good turn, too. Otherwise, the one thing the opponent might do next turn that we'd be a little bit afraid of is just go land and pillage. And then we have the risk of drawing too many 2+ drops, getting them stuck in hand, eventually losing that way. So in face of a possible pillage, it's also nice just to cast a 2-drop and dig a little bit more through the deck. However, we don't find a threat, so let's just stomp out the Ooze, get the Bonecrusher out there in case we draw a land next turn and we want to go aggro mode, get our threat down. Back to the OP, they're going to throw out an Arbor Elf. They have not made a land drop. And I think Arbor Elf is a necessary kill here because clearly they are mana screwed. And here, my friends, my own tech. Nobody else seems to really play this card, but I love Forked Bolt in the right shell. And here's a great example as to why. Forked Bolt kills the Arbor Elf. Forked Bolt also pings the opponent for 1, and every point of life matters when we're trying to kill them, but the most impressive thing about it is that Forked Bolt also turns on Light Up the Stage. Very, very nice. However, I did actually missequence a little bit here. I should not have played my land out before I did those two things, and I am punished for it by hitting 2 lands off Light Up the Stage, only one of which can be played next turn. So, by rights, we should have another land in hand. Learn from my mistake, but... probably not material to the outcome of the match, right? Opponent has the only... Now that I've found many more lands, I was afraid of Pillage. Now the only card I'm afraid of, really, is this. Klothys, God of Destiny. I think we can handle anything else. Unfortunately, they do have the Klothys, but as long as we can get a good clock going, and as long as we can fade some really good follow-ups from the opponent, I think we can beat the Klothys pretty comfortably in a race here. So, OP will... not have the luxury of draining us with Klothys on their turn 5. They've got to make mana, then they get plenty of life anyway. They play Obstinate Baloth. Okay, so the opponent's really starting to put some stuff together here, and we are kind of flooding a little bit, not disastrous, but a little bit. And here, I think we've just kind of got a 2-for-1 ourselves, 3-for-1 really, if you count the life they gained, to take care of the Obstinate Baloth. But we do still have another Bonecrusher waiting in the wings. It is a very nice last card to have under these circumstances. Klothys will drain us for 2, and then the opponent's got Spyro, so, they're doing it. They're putting together the just piles of value that this deck is known for. They'll pitch a Bonecrusher and a Bloodbraid Elf, talk about piles of value, and end step we will stomp out the Spyro, untap, and hope to draw some action. Instead we draw Dismember, a fine one in general, but not really what we wanted here. But, again, we still do kind of have our proverbial boot on their throat. We are really making them have some good stuff here, and they have, but will it keep coming? Well, the answer is yes, it will. Opponent has Anger of the Gods. Not really a card I expected to see at this stage, but yeah, their parade of really good stuff just keeps on coming. So they'll also make a land drop, so they've had the Anger in hand a little while, at least, and then we're going to crack a canyon, and we just keep hitting lands, guys. We just keep hitting lands. So even though our position was amazing, we're falling further and further behind here. Soul-Scar Mage could be a good start. However, we'll need some real help off the top if we're to overcome the Klothys plus the opponent's hand, whatever it might be. OP is going to misplay a little bit here. When I saw the mana get floated by Klothys instead of draining us, I thought we were in for a 5-drop. I was actively hoping for Glorybringer because at least we could then dismember it. It doesn't get any value, and maybe, just maybe, we get the right cards off the top. But instead, opponent will, yeah, again, they just made mana there for no real reason that I can tell. To cast a Chandra that they didn't need. But the Chandra herself, a very bad omen for us. We're cantripping a little bit. We find a Lava Dart, and so we can at least take care of the Chandra. So we won't lose to her, but we are in a position where we're losing to the Klothys. So opponent, I remember, I think, thinking about this for a little while and then deciding to target Lava Dart. Now, you do understand why they do it, because in theory, if we rip like a haste threat off the top and they don't have answers, then our Lava Darts can represent a ton of damage. So you do kind of get it, but at the same time, it might be a little bit loose not to just take the Drain for 2. Because instead of a 4-point life swing in their favor, we now just ping them for 1. So really, it was a 5-point life swing virtually, and what they get out of it is, you know, we have to cash in a land that we probably didn't need, and they force out the Lava Dart on our own terms. So I'm not sure. An interesting spot, though, and this is an interesting matchup, right? Opponent will main phase some Spyro tokens, and hey, we have drawn Monastery Swiftspear, so definitely maybe a point in favor of opponent's play last turn. Hard to say, right? But what I'm going to do here is just ping 1, because we are starting to get that little bit lower on lands. It could make their Pillage good, where otherwise it wouldn't be. But more importantly, I expect opponent, if they made this play last turn targeting the Lava Dart, I expect them to make the play this turn as well. So therefore, we're going to deny them the life gain again, and yes, they do, by responding to the trigger. So Klothys has only drained us like once or twice, even though it's been around since turn 4, and it's turn 10, right? So opponent has ripped Bloodbraid off the top, seems pretty clearly like a top deck to me, since they made the tokens last turn. Another brick from Bloodbraid going into a redundant Klothys, who's of course legendary. So we're presented with another interesting kind of small decision here on the end step. If we dismember now, we can untap and cast 2 drops like Manamorphose, Stomp, most importantly, Bedlam Reveler, which is still able to be cast for just 2 mana. And we've been through almost half of the deck, haven't found a Rev. Would have been our best find for a while now. So, of course, end stepping is going to allow us to do that. But, of course, we miss out on a point of damage without getting the Prowess trigger. So another interesting micro decision, as I say, but I do decide to dismember that. I guess another thing we could have do is just held Dismember to preserve our life total in case we drew like a shock this turn or something. But I think at this point we're far enough behind, we have to kind of play to draw our good outs and for the opponent to not have much. We are punished, of course, because we draw Swifty, so we miss out on 2 points of damage. And opponent will make mana off of Klothys unnecessarily yet again. They play Arbor Elf and Glorybringer, so this time they do use all the mana, but they would have just killed us if they drained us, right? If they just drained us plus hit for Glorybringer, we'd just be dead. So I don't know if those are misclicks or if they're miscalculating. Either way, doesn't matter. We can't beat that board. We draw light up the stage. That is just going to do it. So we were in an amazing position here with our opening curve out and their mulligan to 5 and their mono woes and the fact that our answers lined up. But that parade of stabilization forces, beginning with Klothys, who not only is a great stabilizer if it has support, but also is an inevitable win condition and proved to be what actually did us in. Klothys, of course, was followed by Obstinate Baloth into whatever it was, Seasoned Pyromancer into Anger of the Gods. It was just pretty crazy. So just goes to show you what the deck can do even when they're on the ropes, but we still have game 3. It's a 1-land keep on the play, but it's not a very risky one because we do have 2 1-mana threats, which is great, and we also have 2 light up the stages, and we are reasonably expectant of our Soul-Scar Mage connecting, ironically because the opponent keeps 7, right? And if they keep 7, you pretty much know they've got either Arbor Elf or Utopia Sprawl on turn 1, and it is the latter, and we also draw our second land, Natty, so we never didn't have it, but we're going to sequence this way in case we hit 2 lands, just like we saw previously. In this case, we do not, so we'll play the second land from hand. Lava Spike and Light Up are actually pretty good cards to set up for the long game. You know, we're doing exactly what Prowess wants to do, which is present a clock, pressure the opponent, and still, in multiple ways, you know, by going upstairs and by going along the ground, and still be pulling ahead on cards. So those are very good finds, but they do not really control the board. So the opponent could have a lot of scary stuff here, including some onboard stuff that we can't quite kill necessarily, or they can have this, which is another Anger of the Gods, a very timely turn 2 Anger of the Gods. You know, we're 2 for 1ing them back, so it's not a complete disaster, but it's definitely pretty rough. I am going to Manamorphose main phase before we do anything else for the exact same reason I outlined before, and also because we really want to guarantee our 3rd land drop. Once we Manamorphose, we'll Lava Spike into Light Up, and we see Bedlam Reveler hanging out there, plus Mountain. Those are some pretty weak finds off of this Light Up, so I do decide to opt for a second Light Up, trying to give us the maximum value off of this turn. Not necessarily sure when next we're going to be able to easily enable a Light Up, and also saying this Bedlam Reveler is as good as gone, right? Because either we're losing the 1 from hand or losing 1 from here, doesn't really matter, so we might as well Light Up and give ourselves the option for a turn 4 that does not involve casting Reveler, which we may or may not want to do, depending on what they do and what we draw for turns. So what they're going to do looks like another Spyro, pitching another Anger and an Arbor Elf, but not making a 4th land drop. Okay, fair enough. So we will play the land from hand, which is a good signal as to our intent. We're going to go on the Bedlam Reveler plan. So what I wanted to do here is give ourselves the most possible options in the second main phase after, or, you know, post Reveler draw and discard, while also getting the most value out of our hand. So Wild Slashing the Spyro, that's fine. It's a fine way to use that card. Lava Dart, though, we do not need to use because we can get, of course, the back half value out of it. So to that end, we slash into Rev, leaving 1 mana open, discarding the Lava Dart, and this allows us to do one of the 2 things that we really wanted to do, actually, which was either play the Crash Through from exile or play the Soul-Scar from hand. The Crash Through is more value positive. The Soul-Scar, you know, puts together a more threatening clock. So after a little bit of deliberation and also having found the 3rd Reveler in our hand off of this Reveler that we just cast, I decide let's just extricate every ounce of value we can out of our progression and put our faith in our deck to really outgrind the opponent. Like, that, I think, is our signal that we're supposed to follow here. Opponent doing plenty of grinding, though. They had the 2 for 1 Anger and back-to-back Spyros, 4 tokens made along the way for free, pitching some value, making the 4th land drop, and still with 4 cards in hand. We draw Swifty for turn, and this is going to be pretty good. We got a pretty good turn, guys, not going to lie. We can dump out the whole hand. Soul-Scar into Swifty, into Lightning Bolt. You know, some of these burn spells arguably could go upstairs, but I do think we're supposed to control the board with our own wide board. And then, of course, a big follow-up Bedlam Reveler. You love to see it. And now, with full information of what's in our hand, we know exactly how to proceed. And to me, the obvious thing to do here is just to attack. They don't have good blocks. Even if they quadruple block Swifty, we can flash back this dart one of them and kill the other 3 in combat. So, and now that we know that we have a bunch of cheap stuff in our hand, we're very happy to do that aggressively, right? So the opponent wisely, I think, just chump blocks and untaps, and they will find, frankly, one of the things that are a little bit more scary, just a big body with life gain. You know, I'm not too worried about too much else at this point. Reveler, Survive Anger of the Gods, Glorybringer, Chandra, these things are no longer scary. Clotha's too slow. So Obstinate Baloth, a very good find for the opponent. But we have Manamorphose off the top. Talk about good finds. Talk about good ways to kick it all off. The follow-up, you could sequence a couple different ways here, but I did decide to flash back a Lava Dart to turn on a cheap Light Up the Stage, and we are rewarded for it because we find another threat and a Fiery Islet, and because we have such cheap cards in hand, we can crack an Islet, see what we find, but the cards that we had in hand were sufficient, so a Bolt and a Dart will take care of the Baloth, and then we can flash back a Dart to hit another token down, and then our attack is coming across for 9, plus 14 is 23, plus 9 is 32, plus 4 is 36, and they only have a 1/1 blocker, not enough. So, I do complain a little bit about Gruul when I'm on black-based midrange because it just feels so punishing to play against, and I have wondered audibly in the past what they do against like combo decks, and some people in my Discord have been sharing insights with me on that regard, and for that I thank them. But I will say this in favor of Gruul, that this matchup made me realize, this is like probably the 4th, maybe 5th time I've played against this or Ponzo or something in the same family with Prowess, and these are always really interesting matches, and I think it's about 50-50, and I think it's good gameplay, I really do. When you're in a position, as I said at the beginning of this match, when you're on Prowess and you can pivot to a controlling role on the opponent's board, and it's not like going to yield an 80-20 result in your favor as long as you draw the removal like it would with Infect and Elves, or it's not like a Despair near guaranteed loss move like it would be against, I don't know, Dredge or something like that. When it's a deck like this, it really does lead to good 50-50 gameplay where decisions matter and a lot can happen. So that's what we saw here, and it was a really feel-good, just overwhelming Bedlam Reveler chain with a huge swing for the win. Always love to win that way on Prowess, and we start out the league the right way. We've won the die roll here in round 2, and we do not have an early threat, so that is the only downfall of an otherwise very functional, very balanced hand, but we can control the opponent's board very well if they have a board that's able to be controlled, and if not, we are just burning upstairs and looking for an early Bedlam Reveler, and when we see Mystic Sanctuary, we know that our dreams of controlling the board, killing a bunch of X1s, are probably not going to come to fruition. For already the 3rd time this league, we lead on a Manamorphose without a board just because it makes sense under our circumstances. The opponent with a very aggressive Force of Negation, pitching Ice Fang Quattle. I suppose it does make some sense, but a little bit surprised to see that all the same. Opponent with mono blue mana that they're representing here, and then we're just gonna deal out our sorcery speed damage while we can. Now the opponent will let both of those resolve, then the end step, it is Frantic Inventory. For those who don't know, this is a new piece of tech from M21. Instant speed, 2 mana, draw a card, then draw cards equal to the number of cards named Frantic Inventory in your graveyard. Definitely a cool new one. Opponent makes a green land drop, and then they'll say go, holding up 2 mana. And we are, again, just dumping out the hand, trying to fuel Rev ASAP. So Lava Dart will connect, and we're just drawing more burn. Just drawing more burn again. This is fine enough if our Reveler can connect. If not, we might be in a spot where, I don't know if we're going to really get there, right? Depends all on what they have. So another Frantic Inventory, kind of bad news for us, right? A 2 mana draw 2, guaranteeing this 4th land, and then they're tapping out, which is exciting for a minute until you see Wilderness Reclamation, which means they're never practically going to be tapped out again. Just an editorial aside, I really don't like playing against the new versions of blue decks. I think the fair versus unfair dichotomy, these decks are nominally fair in many cases, not as much Wilderness Rec, but the fair versus unfair dichotomy is no longer a relevant way to categorize the decks, in my view. The blue decks are kind of all miserable to play against for me, personally. I know that's somewhat subjective, but Wilderness Rec, I've got to say, is about the worst of them all. I just do not like this deck, so I'm really hoping with like a personal vendetta that we are able to win here. But so my sequencing there, was deliberately quote-unquote incorrect. Basically, we know that Wilderness Wreck is just, you know, they have that late game inevitability. So I go to the end step, I let the trigger resolve, I let the lands untap, and then it's kind of an obvious gambit, but it's all we have access to here with our hand. We cast spells into the untapped lands, hoping it draws out permission so we can resolve a Bedlam Reveler next turn. But, of course, the opponent does not fall for it. We had to try, right? We've drawn Manamorphose, so basically the way I see it here is if they do have permission, well, we'd rather lose our Manamorphose to it than the Bedlam Reveler next turn. And if they don't have permission, then Manamorphose is a free roll, right? So either way, I think it's correct to lead here, but the opponent has Remand. Hate to see it. And back to the OP, they're going to, on the end step, you know, just casually tap, untap, draw 4, you know, cast 2 Archmage's Charms, and then still have 4 mana open when they ship it back over to us. We've drawn another Bedlam Reveler. It looks clunky, but you know what? I don't think the first one's going to resolve, so now I'm going to lead on the Bedlam Reveler. Cryptic Command is the answer, sure, you know, didn't really expect anything different, right? Back to the opponent, they will crack a fetch land for a basic land, play another copy of Wilderness Wreck. Okay. We're approaching Winmore territory, so I guess we don't necessarily care that much. But opponents surely got some shenanigans here on the end step, and indeed they do. Begins with a Growth Spiral, and then they're tapping many a land for Frantic Inventory to draw 3 for 2. And then Nexus of Fate to take another turn and shuffle it back in the deck, and I'm afraid, my friends, that was just the end for me. They then follow up with a Growth Spiral, their hand is still full. I'm just not going to play this one out, just not going to play it out. Technically, is it possible that they could have no permission after all of this, and then we miraculously resolve Manamorphose into Reveler? Yeah, it is possible, but again, this is not my favorite archetype in the world, far from it. I'm just going to scoop and go to game 2. Alright guys, so I will be the first to admit that I am not up on the ins and outs of Simic Wilderness Wreck in the current moment. However, I think in general we do want to justify bringing in the Soul Guide Lanterns, and we know that Frantic Inventory at least is in the deck, and I personally was expecting at least some other graveyard synergies, maybe Snapcaster Mage, maybe Uro, who knows, but cards like that certainly are no stranger to the archetype, and of course the one of Boil comes in. We gotta have our I win button in these matchups if we can afford the, or rather if we can find the window for it. In terms of what comes out, I think it's pretty clear that Forked Bolt is the worst card, followed by Wild Slash. They're just lower damage, and the former is also a sorcery, but some people might be surprised to see me cut one Bedlam Reveler. So, yes, it did look clunky at the end there, but isn't this a grindy matchup? Don't we want our top end? To some degree we do, but here is my understanding of the Wilderness Wreck deck. So they trade away early interaction, right? They trade early interaction off in exchange for having a better late game. And you can say that's true by definition, because a card like Wilderness Reclamation does not in any way help you to stabilize in the early game. Maybe on the turn you play it, maybe, but certainly it doesn't factor into turns 1, 2, and 3. And also they play cards like Nexus of Fate, that's the most extreme example, but generally their roster of cards is filled with things that are good alongside Wilderness Wreck and have synergies and have an basically unbeatable late game if you find them and you have the Wilderness Wreck unanswered. However, again, they make the trade-off, right? They make the trade-off to have that unbeatable late game by having weaker early game interactions. So to that end, I'm not siding like I would against a normal control deck. Bedlam Reveler is coming out and my Kiln Fiends are staying in. We are trying to race a little bit harder than we might otherwise expect to, especially on the play. And we do have a Kiln Fiend hand on the play. It's a pretty good hand. Soul Guide Lantern is very awkward on the play. We either just don't make a play, or we completely lose out on our ETB, and I opted for losing out on the ETB because, again, we are just committing to the race plan here. We are racing as hard as we can. So Kiln Fiend will come down, opponent will fetch a shock land, and then they're passing, holding up a couple of lands. And Light Up the Stage is a very good draw, because the one thing we didn't have going for us is a way to gas out, a way to refuel a little bit. So the presence of Light Up is sufficient incentive for me to just bolt upstairs main phase, followed by a Light Up, see what the opponent has. And there's another Kiln Fiend and another Mountain waiting in the wings. Okay. Mixed feelings about that, right? Kind of mixed feelings about that. So we do actually just have lethal here, or rather, we do not have lethal, but we do have them within striking distance where, like, most one spells or most small creatures plus any one spell would be lethal, but as we suspected, they do have something. Nevertheless, I think it's correct there to go for it, and the something they have proves to be Aether Gust, right? So, okay, Aether Gust, definitely an interesting call, because, of course, with Gust, you can top or bottom, and we know we have the Mountain in exile, so we know that next turn, if we put it on top, we can just go Mountain, double Kiln Fiend, pass to you, and try to draw gas off the top, and have two threats, and there is actually a lot of incentive for that, in my opinion, but at the same time, I decided to go to the bottom. I think leaning on one Kiln Fiend, they have not showed me a splash color yet. I'm seeing this as Simic. They might not have that many answers to a resolved threat, and they just used one of them, right, in the form of Aether Gust. So that was my thinking anyway. And so Mountain into Kiln Fiend it is. We've drawn Lightning Bolt, so far this decision's looking like it might be rewarded. And the opponent has Weather the Storm. Very annoying, very annoying. They'll gain 6. Obviously there are bigger weathers, but nevertheless, just not what we needed, right? Opponent will then follow up with one of my least favorite new printings, Mystic Sanctuary, targeting Weather the Storm, and I felt obligated to compete over this. That's just probably not a card that we're beating because they're doing so many other things. They still have 5 other cards in hand. So I do decide to compete over that. I'm sure that's a fine outcome for the opponent, but I also think it's a fine outcome for us, potentially an obligatory outcome, right? And the opponent has turn 4 Wilderness Wreck, as they so often do. I dare say, as they always do, right? So we draw Lava Spike. Our hand only does one thing. It goes to face. So time to race. Time to race, make them have something. Of course, the blue deck, 4 mana untapped, you've got to expect something, right? But what else can we do besides shove? And when the last card comes out of our hand, the opponent will respond, and I'm thinking, okay, here we go, time to lose. But they Frantic Inventory. Okay, definitely not what I expected. And I should mention we're doing this after block, so we held Wild Slash to beat a Quattle or something, and they don't have that. So it's after blocks, and the opponent then has another Frantic Inventory. Now this is a draw 2, but they're tapped out, so the only thing they can find here is Force of Negation to counter Wild Slash, 2 for 1 themselves, and then still go to 2. But they don't even have that, so in what amounts to nothing short of a minor miracle, we do get there just by, casting burn spells, 3 of them, into 4 open mana and connecting for 10 with Kiln Fiend, despite Kiln Fiend getting tempoed out by the Aether Gust earlier, despite the opponent having the Weather the Storm to gain 6. We still managed just barely to get over the line, but we were totally out of gas. The opponent's probably about to do a bunch of scary stuff with Wilderness Wreck beginning next turn, so we got over the line just in time. Definitely a little bit lucky there, and definitely a little bit sketchy, because again, we did that with a turn 2 Kiln Fiend and a backup Kiln Fiend, and we were on the play. Gonna be a lot harder to pull that off on the draw, but let's give it a shot. I did tweak things a bit on the draw, my friends. I shaved a couple Kiln Fiends. They're just that much less likely to do what they did last game when we are on the draw, and of course, Bonecrusher Giant is coming in, able to tax the opponent's cards like Aether Gust a little bit better, of course, an inherent 2 for 1, so we are taking a little bit more of a grindy approach on the draw. And we have a pretty good grindy hand, frankly. We need early pressure, so even though we're trying to grind, that's in the context of needing early pressure. And and with that requirement fulfilled by the T1 Soul-Scar Mage, I think this is a pretty reasonable hand. So we're going to attack. So why not just, the draw of Lava Dart was a pretty good one. Why not just go Lava Dart, Light Up, attack you? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, we need this pressure. We don't want to lose Soul-Scar Mage to some kind of a blocker. And So, therefore, attacking, holding up Lava Dart is perfectly reasonable. Number 2, we've seen they play Remand. We don't want our Spectacled Light Up to get remanded. We really want to resolve that this turn. So, by attacking first, we both play around a blocker the best we can, and play around Remand, and also play around Aether Gust, because it's going to be a little underwhelming maybe for them to Aether Gust a non-prowessed attacker, right? So, for all of those reasons, that's how we sequence. And we see Light Up will resolve, Crash Through, and another Light Up the Stage are the finds. And while it can be clunky to have 2 Light Ups on the same early turn, because you risk stranding cards in exile, I do think we are so committed to a grindy plan. Nothing else is very appealing right now. So it's either Crash Through or Light Up. I play for a slightly higher upside of Light Up, and we are rewarded so far, because we see 2 more cheap cards waiting in the wings. So Light Up the Stage looking very, very good this match, and the opponent has our old nemesis, Frantic Inventory, on the unstep, and then they're main phasing a Frantic Inventory. This card has been dunking us this match, it really has, and they probably main phase that just to make the land drop, and then they use that land drop for Astrolabe. So a great turn for the opponent, sculpting their hand, seeing a ton of cards, but they are tapped out. What can we do with it? Well, we draw Kiln Fiend. Unfortunately, that is an awkward draw, because we either play the Kiln Fiend and then play something from over here, lose to the other ones, or we put off Kiln Fiend and say, we've missed our window to make this optimal. Maybe it's going to just sit around as our second wave of attack. And I do opt for that line, and to that end, we do begin with Crash Through. And, of course, then it is Lava Dart, and to light up the stage time using getting the most value out of our previous light ups, and also getting the biggest Soul-Scar Mage we can, and drawing a Force of Negation out from the opponent. They will pitch Growth Spiral. So hey, that's a 2-for-1 for us either way, right? And at this stage, it's probably better for their resources to be depleted than for us to see 2 more cards, because we are already flush. We already do have a threat down, and now the onus is on the opponent to stop us, right? So I think that's a great turn for us, a fine outcome for us. But as always, they do have the T for Wilderness Wreck. So what do we do in the face of that? Of course, you could sequence a few different ways here. What I opted to do is begin with a Soul Guide Lantern, because these frantic inventories are a little bit scary. And, you know, remember that Soul-Scar, unlike Kiln Fiend, does get a prowess trigger from the Soul Guide Lantern. So with that in mind, I think now is the best time to lead on a Lantern for a couple different reasons. With Lantern on the stack, the opponent will flash in a Quattle, so with the Quattle's draw on the stack, we will Lava Dart that thing, because we need to take care of it, and I always want to respond to that draw ability if you can, just to play around other permission they might draw. And Soul Guide Lantern resolves, Frantic Inventories out of there. And then once again, we have the idea of either attacking, holding up some effects, but mainly just Lightning Bolt, playing Kiln Fiend, or just going for it. And I said, you know what? The opponent's got 4 cards in hand, about to be 5. They're about to untap with Wilderness Wreck. They're virtually never going to be tapped out again. We have Soul Guide Lantern up in case we need that. I think now is the time to shove. And we have lethal if they don't have another Aether Gust or Life Gain or something like that. And so I said, you know what? I don't think the coast is getting any clearer than it is right now. Let's shove. Do they have it? Are we so lucky? And then after all our spells resolve, we see the opponent tapping out, and it's not a mere Aether Gust, it is Weather the Storm with 6 triggers. So 1, 2, 3, yeah. Definitely a little bit scary. They were at 5, and now, yeah, they go from 5 to 26. So they gain 21 life there. And then our Soul-Scar connects, puts them back to 20. So their life total has been resetted. We have to try to kill them all over again. And obviously that was a disaster, but they've got another Wilderness Wreck, so are we really in for it? Well, not necessarily, because they only have 3 cards in hand, but if they even have one, like, really good payoff card, then we might really never be able to come back from this. So let's just see what they have. They're going to make all their free mana. then they're going to Quattle, then they're going to Ether Gust, and because we already have Kiln Fiend in hand, I did decide to bottom the Soul-Scar off of the Ether Gust, and we have drawn Bonecrusher Giant. So definitely a fine draw, you know, because we are back to trying to grind, and I'll lead on another Soul Guide Lantern, this time getting Weather the Storm out of there. And then we're going to play out that Kiln Fiend. So Kiln Fiend, when we drew it way back when, we're like, well, this might be our second wave of attack, and now that's where we're at. So definitely a pretty interesting spot. But the opponent didn't really do anything crazy on our end step, and now they just make another land drop here, and then they're maybe going to do some stuff on their end step. And we're going to have to find out what it is here once they resolve these triggers, and it is a Growth Spiral, putting another land into play, and then Cryptic to draw and bounce Kiln Fiend. So definitely some really good stuff. But the opponent, after all that, they only have one card left in hand, right? And we have drawn another threat, so it's getting a little bit clunky, too many threats, but in context, I think that is okay. And we obviously just... What our deck does is not as important as what their deck does. There are many cards they can draw here that are totally unbeatable, but they play another island. So far, and they let the triggers resolve without doing anything with them, it looks like they're just flooded. Now, you gotta remember these fetch lands do represent Mystic Sanctuary, and they have Cryptic Command there in the graveyard, but we do have Soul Guide Lanterns to compete over this. And we have drawn Lava Spike, which is actually a very intriguing draw, because if you do the math here, we actually, kind of out of nowhere, have a massive chunk of damage that we can put out this turn. And Lava Dart is crucial to this, so we're going to begin with Spike and a Dart taking care of the creature. You would think that they would have done something if they had something to do that was permission about maybe the Dart, I don't know. But we're going to send them in, and then we're going to stomp before damage and after blocks. And the opponents just got nothing here. The opponents just got nothing at all. So we don't quite kill them. We put them from 20 all the way down to 1, though, which is pretty darn good. Also turns off the fetch lands, which can free up our Soul Guide Lanterns if we need to try to cash them in for lethal here. But we do have just lethal on board, and the opponent will take their draw step and scoop it up. So, wow, we fought through a Weather the Storm that gained 21 life. And that was in the context of them doing frantic inventory curve outs. You know, this was a 2-mana draw 2 on turn 3. With them having turn 4 Wilderness Wreck, with them not lacking for lands, and we fought through a couple Quattles, a Cryptic Command, and Ether Gust that was really annoying, like that card often is against us. And again, if the opponent had just drawn one more, like, really top-end payoff card, or even a card like Cryptic Command one more time, we probably couldn't have got there, but they did experience a bit of a fail rate, and with a card like Wilderness Reclamation, you know, in a normal control deck, these would be 4-mana cards that do something to affect our ability to kill them, whatever it might be. Here, Wilderness Wreck is just like a really good synergy card with a lot of their other cards, but they kind of failed to draw the other half of the combo, if you will, and we took advantage of that fail rate. And look, here's another real selling point for the deck Mono Red Prowess. I think Burn is a great deck. It's strong, it's redundant, which is a good thing, it's consistent, but Burn could not so quickly rebuild and kill the opponent a second time after the opponent gained 21 life off Weather the Storm, and Burn also could not grind as well as we did here and keep up on resources as well. So definitely, I think this match against a deck I hate was a really good selling point for exactly what Mono Red Prowess can still do in the format, and we are 2-0 in another one-lander on the play here in round 3, my friends, and another non-risky one-lander, because we've got the one-drop threat, and we've got a few cantrips, including 2 1-mana ones, so this is a very safe one-lander to keep so far as those go. And we are against another Snow-Covered Island Arcum's Astrolabe deck, hopefully not the same one, but more likely to be just against a Bant Snow pile. That is still the preeminent meta deck in the Snow-Covered Island family, and we connect with Soul-Scar, light up into a second land, awesome, never didn't have it. And then, I did Lava Spike while they were tapped out. We do have a really good pressurizing hand, but I think there is roughly as much incentive to Crash Through. Namely because Crash Through lets us see an extra card, and we are, of course, desirous of curving out and all that stuff. So you could argue that Crash Through was the better play, but at the same time, this is a deck that flashes in low power blockers, so Crash Through to get the trample damage in subsequent turns is also good. Definitely a classic 6-1 half dozen of the other play, if you ask me. Now, we failed to hit the third land, which does kind of suck, so I take a high-risk, high-reward line of going Crash Through. The reward is mainly drawing a second land, but even drawing another really good 1-mana spell like we do in the form of the Soul-Scar is its own reward, because we're digging at least closer to that third land. Did I just say second land? I meant third land. And, we get a little extra upfront damage here this turn, so it's kind of a compromised turn, but, of course, the other kind of, the other alternative line would just have been to slam Kiln Fiend, right? But opponent will path our attacker. Mixed feelings about that, of course. We could really use the land, so it's way better to get pathed than to lose it by any other removal spell. However, too many paths and we're going to be in a lot of trouble, right? We draw the fourth land, so let's lead on it to play around Mana Leak, and then begin on Crash Through, kind of taking the same approach as we did last time. We are splitting the difference. We don't want to go too all-in on a creature that could potentially be removed or bounced, or they could even maybe take control of it sometimes, if they have the right mana with a card like, what's it called? The draw 2 we saw last game. Archmage's Charm, that one. Super annoying card to face when you're on Prowess, right? So yeah, again, we kind of split the difference, and the opponent does indeed have another removal spell at Snapcaster Mage for Path to Exile. We're starting to get, starting to feel a little bit bad about this. Again, the extra land is really nice, but beyond that, it's becoming a bit of a yikes situation, and note how the opponent has totally painless mana, including utility land, that doesn't happen to be relevant against us right now, but might be at some point in the future, and they're just effortlessly splashing white. That's something that if Astrolabe ever gets banned, decks like Burn and Prowess will pick up some incidental percentage points off of that, because, again, the opponents just can't splash colors painlessly anymore, right? So we do follow up with Kiln Fiend. At least we always have a threat to deploy in the wake of Path. And Forked Bolt, not as impressive here as it was in round 1 against Gruul, but still a free point of damage. I think removing the Snapcaster there is correct, before the opponent, I could foresee a future in which the opponent, continues keeping pace with what we're doing, answers everything we're doing, and then, on turn 6 on turn 6 is, bouncing the Snapcaster to their own cryptic command, and just trapping us in that loop. Maybe Mystic Sanctuary gets involved. You would hate to see that. So I like taking care of Snap while they're tapped out, and Forked Bolt gets to deal one. Really nice. So opponent is tapping out here, but it's not for Wilderness Strike this time, it is for Jace. So we are against a Bant Snow deck. It is confirmed. And Jace having to unsummon is a really good outcome for us. For the fourth time this league, we lead just on a Manamorphose on an empty board, looking to see more cards, and Manamorphose into Fiery Islet into one of the cards we really wanted to see, and we are rewarded for digging for this. It is Swifty, because Swifty's going to let us eke out every single point of damage here, and we get to Lava Spike upstairs and then attack Jace off the field, which is so much better than having to point a spell at Jace. And we also have a nice wide board, so we got a Fade a Sweeper effect, and we've got a Fade maybe some other scary things, I don't know. So we've done a lot of really good stuff, but the big problem here is we are starting to flood out at the end. We are starting to peter out. We are starting to run out of gas, and we're at the point where we just got to kind of make him have it. So Lava Dart it is. And the opponent will just concede to the first Lava Dart, not even making us decide whether or not we want to risk flashing it back. So I thank them for that, but very obviously they did not have anything. And while that is a fail rate that is more common, as I explained in round 2, in a deck like Wilderness Wreck, where you have more cards that are kind of synergistic or combo-y, the control decks, almost everything they have should do something here. Permission, removal, board presence, something, right? But the opponent must have just been totally flooded or had something that was very, very underwhelming, not able to keep pace with Kiln Fiend. So I think under most situations there with their opponent having 4 cards in hand, 5 untapped lands. Our attack here, supplemented by a Lonely Lava Dart, does not achieve lethal, but it did happen to here. Definitely pretty lucky, guys. Not gonna lie. Let's go to game 2. Alright, so as you can see against a more traditional control deck, or what passes these days for a more traditional control deck, we are adopting a grindier stance. Kiln Fiends are out, especially on the draw, and the same 2-1 Fork Bolt Wild Slash split goes out as well, and in come the Soul Guide Lanterns and the Boil, of course, but also the Bonecrusher Giants, and we have a risky 1-land keep, but I think it's a keep nevertheless. You really don't want to mulligan in this matchup. It's a great 1-lander, besides the fact that it has the fail rate of no cantrip, so less likely to hit the lands we need to see, and also, in general, like, they are a Path to Exile deck, so if we can put enough pressure together, maybe they have to start giving us lands. But we do want to at least draw the second one naturally. We don't do it on the first draw step, and we don't do it on the second draw step either, so feels real bad, but this could still really pay off if they don't have anything besides Path to answer our Swifties. So we'll play one. Unfortunately, they have Ether Gust, so they are going to tempo us out here a little bit. But you know, we do just bottom that one with Ether Gust because we have a lot of gas, we have a lot of pressure, we have a boil, we just need to draw lands. Unfortunately, opponent draws Timely Reinforcements and we'll play that. Even more unfortunately, we draw Bedlam Reveler, pretty much the worst draw here. We just need lands. So I make kind of a bold attack, just insofar as, like, it's bluffing Lava Dart, which would be a great one to point at a soldier, but we don't actually have Lava Dart, so if they triple block, we have to bolt a soldier, which is much worse. It is, in fact, terrible, but we are pretty behind due to our lack of ability to draw lands, so I make the bluff attack. The opponent chump blocks, the bluff works, we'll Lava Spike second main, and we'll continue single spelling in the face of a control deck that has done a lot of really powerful stuff, including Little Tef, Bounce our Swifty, and once again, we've just got nothing. So the obvious thing there is maybe to redeploy the threat, but the threat cannot attack without a second land and a second spell to do anything here. So I say, you know what? Our only chance is that the opponent floods, and in the course of flooding, they either have nothing or they have only 1-for-1s, like Ether Gust, Mono Leak, Path to Exile, stuff like that. If the opponent is going to draw cards like Cryptic Command, Uro, we're just going to lose. And that's no matter how we sequence there. So to that end, I do decide to just Lava Spike Little Tef off of the field and get him out of there before he can become a 2-for-1 a couple turns down the road and draw them out of the potential fail rate that they have. We draw Soul-Scar Mage. It's still not a second land, but it is the proper play there. However, opponent has Mono Leak. Okay, I don't care. You know, trading 1-for-1 at this point is fine for me. Opponent will Quattle, then deploy a land, and then they start getting frisky with the soldiers, and we draw another Soul-Scar Mage. 6 turns, no second land. What are you going to do? Hey, this one will stick. And then the opponent's just really respecting us. They're going to pass here. 7th turn, no land. Soul Guide Lantern will be the play, though, because taking this Timely Reinforcements away, again, looking toward the long game. Mono Leak and Ether Gust are more impactful, I should say, right now, but we are conceding the now, trying to win the late game, and to that end, we have to answer Timely before it becomes good again. And we also, in general, I think, want to play a Soul Guide Lantern there, so we can cantrip next turn if we still fail to hit the land. I'm making an attack here. I think I would rather get this Death Touch blocker out of there when we're only attacking with 1, 2, 3, as opposed to like a future hypothetical big attack turn where we might not have the luxury of removing it, right? So that's the idea there. So I think I like our sequencing here, but of course the big problem is just never drawing the second land, right? So it is still interesting to talk about these things, but the thing that's good for us is the only 2-for-1 the opponent has found since their Teferi is that Quattle. Instead, they're just Mono Leaking and Ether Gusting us, and again, this is totally fine. Again, we will bottom an otherwise fine top target, and the opponent is going to Mystic Sanctuary away for the Ether Gust. And, you know, I actually thought about just letting it resolve, but I thought that was also, at the same time, a fine window for that, because remember, even though them putting the Ether Gust on top means they're not drawing a 2-for-1. It also is much better than them drawing another land. Plus, that's a big graveyard. We're just getting a lot of Snapcaster Mage and Uro targets out of there, and they didn't have a great use case for Snap, even if they had one in response there. So I think that was a fine window for the Lantern. And the opponent, again, just makes another land drop, so maybe they're flooded. And turn 9, we finally do it. We make the second land drop ourselves. So I'm going for the 2-for-1. It's going to be Lava Spike into light up the stage. And so another 2 lands off of the light up. That sucks, The drought followed by the flood, definitely pretty awkward. Opponent gets to field our Islet, sure. Back to them, and the soldiers are coming across. They've been chipping in pretty steadily here. We're down to 11. And now that we are hitting our land drops, I feel obligated to start pressuring the opponent, using my mana efficiently, and also working toward Bedlam Reveler. So to that end, I do bolt upstairs. I'm not ready to bolt a soldier yet. Bolting upstairs does not turn on the life gain of Timely, so I think that's a fine play. And we have drawn Bonecrusher Giant, and, if we draw another 4th land, Boil is online. So, despite all odds, we are fading the opponent's really impactful, late game value engines, and as proof of that, they just flash in a Snapcaster Mage for pressure, which is abominably bad in this matchup, but it must be all they have. So on the upkeep, to again maybe play around a cryptic snap loop, as best as we can, I do decide to go for a stomp on the Snapcaster Mage, and that will resolve. So, all right, we're doing some things. Unfortunately, the opponent does finally hit a 2-for-1. They're going to main phase a Charm to draw 2, and then there he is. There is the Uro. The card that we really find it hard to beat when we're this far behind. On top of that, Uro gets a Mystic Sanctuary out. They're going to target Archmage's Charm. It's all very, very bad out of nowhere, but that's all it takes sometimes is, the floodgates can open when they just finally hit that first 2-for-1 and when they have all the resources on the battlefield to work with. That's how it's going to go. To make matters worse, we draw another Bedlam Reveler, so we've bolted there because we're trying to stabilize our life total, knowing that Uro is coming out potentially next turn if they can fill up the graveyard. Bonecrusher Giant is our best play here. It just is, After all this, we're kind of still in a really awkward spot. End step, opponent flashes in a Quattle. Then they're going to Path the Giant. Okay, that's pretty bad. And then they've got Field of Ruin, so this is going to fill up the graveyard. I am just going to hit play here. Uro, of course, will be escaped, and we are in big, big trouble because now, even though we have the mana for Boil, we're just dead on field. So we can't Boil, and I don't know what we could possibly draw to kill Uro. Don't think there's any one thing that does it, and we untap, we draw light up the stage. That is definitely not going to do it, so I guess technically we could have tried to play a Bonecrusher Giant and blocked, but we are overwhelmingly and deterministically dead. A minor change to sideboarding, my friends, on the play. We bring back a single Kiln Fiend to increase our threat density, and because we are on the play, and we cut the final shock effect to do so. Sadly, we have a no land 7, and then they show us a no land 6, and we've got to throw that one back too. Now, this is a very, very fine 7 that they're showing us, but of course we've got to make it into a 5, so how do we do that? Well, I think we've definitely got to play for the higher upsides here. The Bant opponent keeps 7. You hate to see that, so we'll bottom one of the mountains, which does give us a bit of a fail rate, but with Soul-Scar on the play, into light up the stage, we do expect to connect and hope to draw the second land in the top small handful of cards. And I think bottoming one of the 2 Soul Guide Lanterns is pretty obvious there too, right? So, OP with the classic Snow-Covered Island into Astrolabe play. We do not hit the second land natty, but we do connect with Soul-Scar Mage, and can light up yield the second land? Well, yes, it can. It can also yield something to do with that mana. Soul Guide Lantern would have been fine there, but I would rather just Lava Spike. Rather just start filling our graveyard for a potential Bedlam Reveler off the top. Rather save the Soul Guide Lantern for a more impactful target with its ETB, right? So, we have drawn a Reveler. Okay, so we are shaping up to have unmulliganed ourselves between a light up and a potential future Reveler if we can get it to resolve. So what do we do here? Well, it's either Manamorphose and see if we find something great off of it, or plan to play the Kiln Fiend. And if we're planning to play the Kiln Fiend, then I think it's correct to attack first before we show them anything, of course. Opponent will have the Quattle, and this is why it's so punishing to mull against Bant, is because starting on turn 2, they get really impactful 2-for-1s like that. So if you're already starting 2 cards down, and then they're the deck with the best value generation in the format, while also having a lot of interaction that lines up well, it just really feels like an uphill battle. But we've won uphill battles before with Kiln Fiend and Bedlam Reveler. Let's see if we can do it here. Unfortunately, opponents curving out nicely. Teferi bounce the Kiln Fiend, a very nice tempo play. Much more impactful against us than most of our other... Teferi doesn't necessarily have great targets against us if we're not on a 2-drop, right? But we are. So, third land has been secured. Kiln Fiend into Soul Guide Lantern. Removing Quattle, which doesn't necessarily do anything besides take one piece of fuel away for Uro, right? But we'll still take it. Opponent just main faces a Supreme Verdict, which... Number 1, it could be worse. They could have a much worse play than that. Number 2, Teferi ticked up, so they could have held that up for instant speed, which I think would have been correct, right? But in any case, doesn't matter. We didn't draw a haste threat anyway. We draw Manamorphose, and we Manamorphose into Boil. Now, guys, if we didn't have to mulligan, we would have this 4th land in hand if we had been able to keep that 7 that became a 5. We'd just Boil them while they're tapped out here? Maybe. It would only hit 2 lands, and they could maybe have Force of Negation too, but it'd still be a pretty good play. It'd slow them down, give us time to maybe resolve the Bedlam Reveler, maybe give them a bit of a fail rate, but we don't have that, so what do we do instead? Well, I take a little bit of a higher risk, higher reward line, decide to cash in my Lantern for a draw. We are rewarded because Stomp, taking care of the Teferi, having a Bonecrusher Giant to play is definitely pretty nice under the circumstances, right? So, we are functioning well considering the mulligan, but we are nevertheless at the opponent's mercy here, and they do have Astrolabe into Uro, into another land, into fetching an island, into another Astrolabe, so a totally insane turn, one that is fully representative of what their deck is about. However, it does give us a window of opportunity where if we can just rip that 4th mountain right off the top, now we are getting a 4-for-1 with Boil, and forcing the opponent to either have Force of Negation, or the Uro will be maybe stranded in the graveyard for a while. It just gives them a big, big setback. But this game not going our way, we don't draw the 4th land, we draw Crash through instead, so I guess that's what we play. We could have jammed Bonecrusher there too, but again, going for a little bit of higher upside, trying to sculpt the hand, and knowing that we can still play Soul-Scar and hold up Lava Dart even if we don't find anything else to do. Or maybe we just drew Lava Dart, but you understand the point here. Sadly, the opponent will get the Uro out there, and there's nothing we could do about it. I forgot to mention that a major reason, this is probably the most important reason we cast Crash through there, was to try to find another Soul Guide Lantern to take care of good old Uro, but we are not so lucky. Uro comes out to play, and then I make kind of an interesting play here. I'm going to Lava Dart the Uro. Well, obviously that's a pretty bad use of a card to shrink a recursive 6/6 down to a 5/5, but do note that this makes it so they have to have at least something. And they do. They have 7 cards in hand, but we're this far behind, we've got to make them have something. And they have to have something, otherwise we are at least presenting the double block with Bonecrusher into Soul-Scar next turn if we draw nothing else. And let's see what we've got. Well, we drew Swifty, which basically serves as nothing else, and it's all pretty rough. We could have jammed Reveler there too, I suppose, but then we would lose the, if I'm counting correctly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yep. But then we'd lose the Swifty and the Bonecrusher from Exile and the Boil. And where does that really put us? So again, I think we have to make the opponent kind of have nothing here and plan to maybe stabilize with, even if we have to chump block, then find a window for Boil, and then Bedlam Reveler. It's like a 1% chance that we could get all that stuff to line up, but that's where we're at in my view. Opponent will path the Soul-Scar. I do decide once again to continue making them have now 2 somethings to find a way through with Uro without losing him, so that's why we flash back there. But of course they do have something, again, we didn't really expect otherwise, and Uro gets to do his Uro thing, which is very tough to beat for a deck like ours. They follow up with Jace the Mind Sculptor, and then they'll Fate Seal us, getting up out of bolt range, and they bottom with the Jace, and we do draw the land, and so hey, now is our window. We do get to boil, and note that they didn't make a land drop last turn. Even off of the Uro, they didn't make a land drop, so it's not like they have lands in hand, and yes, Jace can find them, but if we 4-for-1 with a boil, and then Jace has to dig for lands, maybe, just maybe, with the help of Bedlam Reveler and Swifty to pressure Jace, we can get back into this match. So let's go for the boil. Miraculously, they are tapped out, but of course, they have Force of Negation, pitching Supreme Verdict, and that's just enough for me, my friends. That is just enough for this guy. So, our deck just went through 3 slugfests. We 2-for-1 Gruul, or excuse me, we went 2-1 against Gruul, 2-1 against Wilderness Wreck, and then here we drop the match to Bant Snow going 1-2. So 3 utter slugfests, and we did have our share of good variants, make no mistake, but it was a little frustrating here, not gonna lie, to lose to a deck that's, to me, the clear power outlier in the format, and lose in such a way where we totally lost to our own deck. It took us 9 turns to draw the second land in Game 2, and let me tell you, that Game 2 progression from them was very, very beatable. If we had drawn the second land, and even only operated off of 2 lands, and even we had to wait till like turn 4 to do it, I think we would have won. Frankly, I think we would have won, but we missed the land for so unreasonably long that we did not. And then here, the mull to 5 against a really strong curve out, that's never really gonna end well now, is it? So, as I say, a bit frustrating, but maybe going through 3 slugfests like that, 2 of them being blue decks, I guess going 2-1 is probably about right. We're on the play here in round 4, my friends, and we have a pretty solid Kiln Fiend into Reveler hand backed up by a bunch of burn. It's kind of where we want to be. So I do decide that Lava Spike, even though obviously it makes sense to hold that for Kiln Fiend in some ways, the one thing our hand could do is really get choked up on mana, and we have more than enough raw damage, right? So I think using our mana effectively there is definitely at least somewhat of an incentive, but we are punished for it, because the opponent will fetch and shock into a Birds of Paradise off Breeding Pool, which is not a combination I'm used to seeing, and that punishes us for not just saying go, because of course we could then have end-stepped Lava Darted the bird, and then untap, slam, Kiln Fiend. So what do we do here? Do we ignore the bird and jam Kiln Fiend and try to have an amazing turn 3, or do we do the responsible thing and bolt the bird? Well, I think it is the responsible thing, as I say, to bolt the bird. I don't know what I'm against, and when in doubt, certainly bolting the bird is correct, especially when it is Fort Bolt, which once again gets us a free point of damage that no other spell could have done, while also helping to control the opponent's board. Lots of nice little moments in this league for Fort Bolt, you have to say. And it is the 3rd snow-covered island deck in a row, but certainly an unusual one, and certainly one that I'm just baffled to see this play. Already, like birds in a Breeding Pool snow-covered island deck is strange, and then the fact that they hardcast Life from the Loam is even stranger to me, but what do I know? What do I know? I'm just a little bit confused, so I'm just going to kind of do my own thing here. We'll find the 3rd land, we'll play the Kiln Fiend, and we'll say go and see what they've got. Opponent, of course, going to Dredge. That's what you do when Life from the Loam is in your deck, generally. And they're in a mill Conflagrate over. Well, that's a little bit scary, but the mana doesn't look like it's complying here. Maybe that's part of what Birds of Paradise does. And then they play a fetch land out and say go. So what do we do here? Well, Crash Through, a very good draw. Gonna fill up the yard for Bedlam Reveler, and also just another thing that we can cast this turn while advancing our Kiln Fiend plan. And we have a very, very hefty chunk exchange in the form of damage waiting to be unleashed on the opponent here. Let's see if they have anything. So we begin with Lightning Bolt, and the opponent will have Quattle in response, and that exact card is why it makes more sense to lead on Lightning Bolt than Lava Dart there, I think. And Dart, of course, fired off with the Quattle's draw trigger on the stack, and then whatever they draw off it is not sufficient. Maybe they have Lightning Bolt in the deck, I'm not sure. That would be their best find, of course, or some other 1-mana kill spell for the Kiln Fiend, but they're very dead if they don't have that, and it turns out they don't. So there we go, guys. We are against some kind of a very strange deck that I do not recognize. You guys, please do let me know if you do. I meant to research this before I made the video. Obviously, I didn't do that, but we're looking at Quattle alongside Bird is pretty strange to me. Bird alongside a graveyard package is pretty strange to me too, so I don't know what any of this means. Clearly maybe some kind of just like Temur Loam value deck, but again, how does Birds of Paradise fit into that paradigm? It is not immediately obvious to me. Alright guys, so just a brief kind of intellectual exercise more than anything, because of course I don't know what I'm against, so I'm not giving you expert sideboarding here, but just to give you, some maybe share my thought process if you find yourself in a similar situation. We saw the Life from the Loam and the Conflagrate. Those are two very, very graveyard-committed cards. We have to assume there's more. Even if that's all they have, those are a couple of pretty scary ones, some pretty high-value ones, right? So I think the Soul Guide Lanterns absolutely have to come in. And also, the Birds of Paradise really stuck kind of in my head as of the card that I really couldn't make sense of. But if it's in the deck, we have to give the opponent credit for building a sensible deck, and we therefore have to deduce that the birds are a very important part of their strategy, and maybe they play more Monodorks as well. To what end, again, I don't know. But with those things in mind, we do commit to a plan that allows us to disrupt the graveyard and also control the board a bit. So to that end, Bonecrusher Giant comes in ×2 alongside the 3 Soul Guide Lanterns, and we just bring in 1 copy of Abrade for more removal, and we cut Kiln Fiends and Lava Spikes because those are the things that do not as well compete with what they're up to. I also brought in the Boil here just for fun, but I didn't know what that was about, but this is my 3rd snow-covered island deck of the league, and it seemed like it was at least reasonable to me, although, of course, Life from the Loam could, in theory, claw them back from it. But if, like, almost all the lands they're playing out are islands, maybe not. So that was something I thought, why not? Since we don't know what's going on, let's play an I win button. So as I say, this was just kind of an intellectual exercise because, as you'll see here when I hit play, the opponent will mulligan pretty deep. I believe they went down to 5, and maybe they saw an unplayable 5 or a really bad 5, so they were going to a virtual 4, and they see us keeping 7, and they just say, whatever I'm up to with my brew is not sufficient to mulligan to Oblivion and then beat a Prowess 7, and we had a really good 7. We're going to go turn 1 Swifty. Unless we have a bird to kill, then it's turn 1 Lava Dart. But either way, it's going to be turn 2, attack you for a bunch, Soul Guide Lantern, and or light up the stage, depending on what we want to do. Even against a 7, with whatever their deck was, I would feel pretty confident here. But hey, we get the free win here. It's a nice palate cleanser, right? To have a free win here virtually in Game 2, followed by a turn 4 kill in Game 1, where we still spent a little time and energy taking care of their board. Definitely really nice after slogging through all of those ones in rounds 1, 2, and 3. So again, guys, if anyone out there knows what the opponent was up to here, please do post it in the comments below. But until then, we've cashed the league, and I will see you for round 5. Well, we're doing pretty well with our die rolls this league, you have to say. I think the only one we lost was in round 1, so that's definitely a nice kind of point in our favor, nice feather in our cap, getting really good at digital die rolls, very crucial on this deck sometimes anyway. And we are with a really nice racing hand here on the play, presuming our top deck yields a little bit more gas and or a way to grind, depending on what we need. But certainly this is a very nice keep in the dark. But is it entirely in the dark? Well, not necessarily, because the opponent is Sodek, or Sodek, I don't know where the enunciation should be placed, but the Dredge Master himself. I don't really follow his content, but I do know that he is a renowned Dredge player, and that's what we expect to see. So after a mull to 6, the opponent will indeed show that they're on Dredge with a turn 1 main-phased Haggle, pitching Golgari Thug, and dredging into Stinkweed Imp and Narcomoeba, among a couple other not relevant hits, but we do note that Blackcleave Cliffs is one of the lands that hits the bin, and that's not a card that I am used to seeing on Dredge. I don't usually see fast lands unless they are Copperline Gorge, so definitely an interesting note, and we draw our 4th mountain off the top. Not really what we want to see, so what do we do here? Well, this would be another situation where Forked Bolt would more than earn its keep. You tag the Narcomoeba, you tag the opponent, you Lava Spike the opponent, you smack for 3. That's a good turn. That's a really good turn, too. However, I do say we've got to play the Kiln Fiend. Kiln Fiend is the very obvious play here. And to that end, I like attacking with a Soul-Scar Mage because it is still risky for the opponent to not block. We could be holding Lightning Bolt and Lava Dart, you know? So even though the sorceries don't necessarily give you as much flexibility, sometimes your bluff makes them as good as an instant would be, and of course Forked Bolt does have that higher upside. And again, I've gone into this in a separate video, so for my fully fleshed out thoughts you can see that, but the opponent does indeed take the block here, and I think that's great for us. However, the opponent's got a Stinky in the yard, and the Stinkweed Imp is the scary one to dredge, obviously, but they totally brick. 2 fetch lands and 3 Shriekhorns hit the bin. This is great news for us. So all we have to do is hope the opponent does not have another Enabler in hand, a really good follow-up here. And they are fetching and tapping. Note also the Fetch and Shock of Sacred Foundry, another land that I am least not used to seeing. Maybe this is the new in vogue way to build Dredge, but I haven't faced it yet prior to this. And sure enough, they have a Cathartic Reunion, so you always hate to face the nut draws, which this basically is. You know, they didn't have great hits early, but in terms of enablers and things to pitch to the enablers, it really was. Cathartic Reunion, getting a bunch of good stuff in the bin. The first Dredge will hit double Creeping Chill plus Narcomoeba. The opponent has double Ox and a Conflagrate in the yard. It's all pretty bad stuff, especially the Creeping Chills. So we draw Soul-Scar Mage. Not really a very good draw in light of what's going on, and honestly, it might have been a misplay for me to play it out because we are vulnerable to getting our entire board swept now by Conflagrate. So might have been better to hold back the Soul-Scar Mage as a second wave of attack, but even so, we're just putting them to 8 and deploying a 1-2 with no other follow-up, and totally at the mercy of them bricking here, right? But they do indeed cast that Conflagrate, pitching their whole hand, and we see they're not breaking. They have another Stinkweed Imp in the bin. Silver Smote Ghoul, another piece of new technology, very good synergy with Creeping Chill, getting back a free 3-1 with a chill and also being able to draw a card. And sadly, our turn is crashed through into land. So while, again, it might have been better to hold that back, it does not materially affect the outcome of the game because we would just be in the same spot here, but with a 1-2 on the field, right? And the opponent's got Ox of Agonis. And I definitely scooped sometime around here. The replay is starting to slow down. Maybe I do scoop to this, or maybe after they show me what happens here. I don't exactly remember, but we absolutely get buried by Dredge with some newfangled technology here. But really, the old stuff is what did us in, right? It was the Cathartic Reunion as the second wave after the first wave of dredging kind of fizzled out, and the Creeping Chills. The Creeping Chills kept them in the game, plus we flooded, right? So we had a start that could have raced them under other circumstances, but a combination of us flooding and the opponent not having the mercy to fade their own Creeping Chills for us, well, we just got dredged. But it is a match that we can win game 1s in. I really like to win the game 1 because then I feel favored to win at least one of the post-side games. But we didn't do that. Let's go to game 2, see how we fare. I suppose sideboarding is pretty obvious here, guys. I side out my Lava Spikes. They seem especially bad against Creeping Chill. And I side in my Graveyard Hate. 3 copies of Soul Guide Lantern, which has seen a ton of play here, and the first hand was kind of unkeepable, pretty underwhelming, and no Graveyard Hate, and also no threat. If I didn't click past that too quickly, I think that had no threat. And we mulligan to a 6 with the exact same problems, although this one's a little bit better just because we are able to see a ton of cards potentially with these light up the stages. But still, no Graveyard Hate, no threat, not where we want to be. But we see the opponent will mulligan as well, so I do decide to keep this 6. Probably better than most 5s. Again, we are mulling toward only 3 pieces of Graveyard Hate. They're not that impressive, right? They're fine, but they're certainly not I-win buttons in the matchup. They're just like a good form of disruption as we race, so we can't go too low on resources either, I don't think. So that's my thinking here. We hope, of course, to see the opponent mull deeply. Unfortunately, they stay at 6, right along with us. Red-White Fastland, Inspiring Vantage again. I'm not used to that, but the opponent goes T1 Shriekhorn, and then it is back to us. We draw another land. Okay, so still no threat, so we're all in on Forked Bolt into Light Up being really good. Gotta find threat and or graveyard hate. Instead, we find 2 more burn spells. 2 more underpowered burn spells, by the way. We're just like a really bad burn deck right now. And the opponent's first hit off Shriekcorn will not only hit a Creeping Chill, but will also put Smiting Helix in the graveyard. This version of Dredge seems like it has a ton of hate against us. Smiting Helix on top of Creeping Chill and Silver Smoke Ghoul, which is good value alongside both. Definitely seems pretty tough if you ask me. So a couple of rough hits off Shriekcorn. Their second Shriekcorn will yield Lightning Axe and Prized Amalgam, but thankfully there's no Cathartic Reunion this time around. So the opponent just makes the second land drop, says go. And we've drawn Lightning Bolt, so our really bad burn deck mode continues, and we will go Forked Bolt into Light Up, trying to find a threat or a Soul Guide Lantern, and we do find the latter. So it's a pretty good find, and I do decide to play it, even though it means one of our Lava Darts will sadly go into exile. I think it is certainly incumbent upon us to get our graveyard hate down. We've got a nice target to hit there in the form of Prized Amalgam, and, of course, we're holding up the Lantern for, cracking and clearing out the whole graveyard if we need to, and we might well need to. They have another Shriekcorn activation happening on their upkeep. So they hit another really good 2 off the Shriekcorn. It's Narcomoeba and Prized Amalgam. So is this enough? Is this sufficient to compete? We're getting 6 total cards out of the graveyard, which is a lot, especially because they didn't have a Cathartic Reunion last turn. I think they would have cast it if they did, because we didn't have any graveyard hate at the time. So 6 cards total. We get the Smiting Helix out of there, which is nice. This is sorcery speed, they can't flash it back in response. And we get Narcomoeba and Prized Amalgam out before they come back. So while there is always, maybe some incentive to hold that a little while longer, I think that was more than enough for me to want to pull the trigger there. And again, we kind of figure they don't have another enabler. They show no signs of it, and indeed they don't have it here. So we're disrupting well enough, and we're seeing a lot of cards, but sadly, our deck is not complying in such a way that allows us to race them. Again, we're just a really bad burn deck right now. We just draw another Lava Dart, very bad, so we'll use the one from exile before it goes away, and we're hoping to draw more Grave Hate or a threat while also fading the opponent drawing another enabler, but they find the enabler. They find the best one. It's Cathartic Reunion, pitching Stinkweed Imp, dredging a couple times, flipping over a bunch of really scary stuff, but no immediate impact, so nothing coming back, no Creeping Chills, so we have exactly this turn to find another piece of Grave Hate. Instead, we find our 4th Lava Dart, so while, of course, technically we could have kept playing, we're dead. We're dead. We're not beating the Ox. We're not beating the Dredges. They've gone through half of their deck, and they've only hit that 1 Creeping Chill. There's 3 more for them to hit. There's a bunch of other scary stuff. We're not beating this with 2 Lava Darts and a Lightning Bolt. I hate to say it. So, again, we needed to find a threat, and if they didn't have removal, it probably would have been enough to race them. Or we needed to find another Soul Guide Lantern there. Neither was forthcoming, and we are sadly defeated by the Mardu Dredge deck. So yeah, I'll have to look into this as well and see if this was an experimental variant or a version that is gaining steam. I haven't seen it other than this match. So definitely kind of an interesting conclusion that I'm drawing from this Dredge matchup. At the end of round 1, I said that the Gruul match was really cool. It's really cool to play Prowess against Gruul. Generally speaking, it is, even though Gruul is a deck that leaves a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth when I face it on midrange. Interestingly, the experience is kind of reversed here with Dredge. So Dredge is a very linear deck, and it's very overwhelming. Like, its whole thing is to ignore most normal forms of interaction, especially game 1, and just go off and provide an unbeatable board state for free, basically. Most of their spells are effectively free once they spend mana on the enablers, right? And so many people don't really like Dredge, but I actually find Dredge to yield a lot of really interesting kind of cat and mouse games when I'm on Green-Black X, especially if I'm on Straight Rock, because you don't necessarily need like your ley lines or your spell bombs or whatever you're playing to shut down Dredge. It's not like you mull to Oblivion looking for those, and then they can either answer them or they can't. Like, if you're on Rock, you can go Inquisition into Scavenging Ooze and have a really interesting game. Really close, really tight, really skill testing, and definitely can play out a variety of different ways. Unlike on Gruul, where they kind of just like, you disrupt them and they fail, or they mash you. But here, it's kind of the opposite. So on Prowess, we can beat Dredge. We didn't here, but we can definitely beat them. But for me, it's kind of not that interesting because I don't have that much agency, right? It's just like, I'm racing you, I'm hoping I get a good enough hand to race you, and I'm hoping to find the relevant disruption along the way, but ultimately, the agency is not that much there. So, kind of interesting in many ways to play other archetypes, because my experience against two decks was just completely flipped on its head. Prowess is cool to face Gruul with, but not so cool to face Dredge with, and this is just like game experience. It's not about winning or losing. And the inverse for me is true on a deck like Rock. So kind of cool, right? Kind of cool, just more incentive to see the variety of Modern firsthand as the pilot. But anyway, guys, that was our league. Let's do a little bit of a wrap-up, talk about what we learned from the gameplay here. Alright, my friends, so another kind of interesting, like, psychological takeaway here is after I played this league, I walked away from it with the impression that Kiln Fiend was bad. I was like, I see why people play it. I'm not necessarily that into the idea of the 4th Reveler right now, but man, I didn't think Kiln Fiend was very impressive here. But having just gone back through the replay and commentated the replay for you, I actually think Kiln Fiend was one of the MVPs here. Isn't that funny how that works? Like, my walk-away immediate impression was like, well, Kiln Fiend wasn't very impressive, and to be fair, we did side away from it a lot, but again, objectively speaking, looking back at this replay, I think Kiln Fiend won us a lot of games that most other cards that we would play in its stead would simply not have been able to do. So, definitely a very, very intriguing kind of, what's going on there mentally, right? You guys let me know, how does Kiln Fiend feel for you lately, and what do you take away from it here? Other than that, a lot of my Spice, for example, Pillage, we didn't have any cause to really play that. We were not able to boil out an opponent, although we came close a couple times, and we were punished for, usually I only play 3 Claw, we were kind of punished for playing all 4, because of course we didn't run into any red deck mirrors, right? But beyond that, I think the configuration's strong. I think Forked Bolt was a real all-star in a very relatively minor way. Most other shocks would have been sufficient, as they always were. It is a minor distinction, but Forked Bolt really made the case to be a shock on your radar, at least for the purposes of the gameplay here. And again, I think Kiln Fiend was definitely an all-star. We had a really good win round 1 on the back of Bedlam Reveler value. That was really fun. That's always something that we're happy to achieve, right, with the deck. Soul Guide Lantern was a card that we really needed access to this league, and we brought it in, I believe, 4 out of the 5 matchups, if I'm not mistaken. At the same time, how impressive really was it? I don't know, it was okay. It was okay, and maybe that's all we can really hope for. I'm not that inclined to play Leyline of the Void in this deck unless we get Faithless Looting back. Then I'll play Leylines, and then the whole deck will look a little bit different, right? And the deck will be more powerful too, of course. But until then, I think Soul Guide Lantern's probably the best we have. It's still kind of medium, but it's definitely at least a necessary evil. Maybe an outright good right now. That is my impression. Otherwise, guys, I think that's pretty much what I would take away from the list and from the games. If you're looking to pick up Prowess or to get back into Prowess after, like myself, having left it on the shelf for a while, I think this list is a great place to start. Now, maybe you'd be just as well picking another 5-0 list, but again, I looked at all of those recent ones. They all had something I didn't like, so I came up with this, and if you end up taking it for a spin, please let me know how it treats you. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you especially to all Patreon supporters. I love you guys. You guys are the ones who make this content possible. It's really hard for me to find enough time to play to keep up with the Joneses, to say nothing of the trophy leaders, just to keep up with the regular players. Like, I just don't get to play that much, and a lot of the time that I would otherwise play, I spend making content, whether it be doing the stuff to get it ready for uploading after having live recorded it, or doing a more time-consuming thing like making a replay like this. So the point here is I can only do that because of your generous support. Thank you again so much. I hope I continue earning your patronage, and if you guys out there enjoy the content, please do consider signing up on Patreon. It's the best way to give back. You get access to the Discord, and it's a great time in there. Plus, you can earn donation leagues over the course of time. So thank you very much. Appreciate your views and your likes, your comments, and your subscription to this channel. Stick around for whatever the next gameplay video is going to be. I don't know offhand what that will be, but we've got a wide variety, including more prowess in the future, coming for you. So thanks again, and I will talk to you soon. Hope everybody out there has a wonderful day.